Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi, everyone. I guess I'll do a really quick introduction. So, welcome to our Coffee with Curators today. So, today's theme is historical fiction. Today, we'll be doing a bunch of different things. We'll be answering some fan questions, and there's an Owl Babble on April 14th, which is tomorrow at 2 p.m. PST with Ziba for Midnight Strikes, which is our March book, and it is also very historically based, which is very fitting for today's talk. My name is Teresa. I'm one of the members of OwlCrate's curation team. I'll be the one doing the Owl Babble, and you might have seen me do some of the other ones.
Yeah, and I'm Yeatasmin. I'm one of the other curators on the curation team. I'm really excited for today's live. Just a reminder, our lives are available to watch later in case you can't watch this one today. They're under our live streams tab. And in terms of getting any new information from us, sign up for our newsletter, check out our TikTok and Instagram. We post a lot of updates there, and we've been posting a lot of really cool new updates recently as well. So you do want to keep up with that. As for giveaways, we do have a giveaway plan today. We are giving away 5 March boxes, which is really fitting for today's theme talk. So yeah, stay tuned to see if you're going to be a lucky winner. And to give some backstory on what Theme Talks is, a little bit of information. Theme Talks is a new kind of content that we're trying out for the lives, where before we unbox a box, we kind of give a precursor to like what the theme might be about relating to like Theme Talks. So because we're going to be unboxing March soon, we figured, let's talk a little bit about what the theme is about. So it's very historical fiction based. So we did have a bunch of questions come in related to the theme, and we just wanted to talk in general about historical fiction and just any content relating to historical fiction, because it is a really cool genre. I think it's an underrated genre, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, we did get some questions for relating to like historical fiction books. We also did get other pre-asked questions that we will get to in a bit. And feel free to also drop some questions down in the comments that we can answer live as well. Yeah.
Shall we get into it?
Yeah.
Sounds good. So, first question that we have is, what's your favorite historical fiction? And they said, I love anything that is World War II.
Mm-hmm. So, historical fiction wise, kind of like what I was saying, it is a very underrated genre, which is also related to the reason why I haven't dabbled in historical fiction as much as I would like. But I do like historical fiction that involves settings with like political intrigue. So, like political intrigue regarding like a royal family or like scandals or revolutions. I really like that kind of historical fiction that involves those kind of tropes, basically.
I tend to go for romance if I'm looking for escapism. Like Outlander is one of my favorite series,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's just because having a historical setting really just it emphasizes certain aspects of the romance plotline that you might not find elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
which I find really fun. For example, like Outlander, obviously with the time travel, there's a very different dynamic, but also because it's set during a period of time where Scotland is going through a lot of turmoil, that war aspect and specific like historical details really they emphasize the plot and they add that drama, which I really love. But I also I tend to dabble a lot in like various different genres when it comes to like the overlap between historical fiction and other fiction. Like I read a lot of the classics, for example, like Umberto Eco's like the War of the Roses series, and Hilary Mantel's like Wolf Hall, I think it's called. Yeah. So it's like I tend to read across the different time periods and focus more on the plot than the actual specific event itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Outlander too, which I feel like is very fitting for like in relation to our March book, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
a way, because there's also a lot of time stuff involved with both from what I remember. So that's really cool.
It's just really fun taking somebody with like modern sensibilities, throwing them back in time and going, you got to deal with all of this. And
Oh, it's such a cool
it's
concept.
just, yeah, like with Outlander specifically, I think it's because Claire, the female protagonist, she's a nurse working, I believe, in like World War II. So she has a like no nonsense gung ho attitude, and she like knows all of this stuff about medical care essentially. And she goes back and she goes, no, y'all are doing these things wrong. Like, minor spoiler
Yeah.
alert, in like one of the latter books, she actually starts making her own penicillin using like mold. And I found that particular bit more interesting than the romance actually at one point. So yeah, it's all of those like fun little bits. And it really shows when an author does their research. And I really like it's great. I mean, it's fiction, so if like an author doesn't get like the details right, or they don't, quite frankly, they don't care as much about keeping it accurate to history, I don't mind that as long as like the plot is compelling. But when an author does their research and you can tell that they do their research because they add in all of these extra bits, like they're almost like trying to show off, I love that. It's my favorite part about historical fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the time aspect of it just really adds that extra oomph to these kind of books too. Yeah. Favorite period, time period for setting, or what time period do you not like to read? I'm a Regency girly. I like Regency books, but I would say I don't like historical fiction set in the more recent decades. So I guess like 70s and onwards. I don't mind them, but I like it like the older they are, the like the more intrigue I get, because it's like it's so long ago. Whereas with more recent decades, I'm like it's all right. Like I don't get as into it. I've noticed.
I really like medieval stuff because I almost specialized in like a medieval, not in medieval history necessarily, but I almost became like a medievalist when I was doing stuff for my English major. So I really like medieval fiction. The one that's coming to mind right now is actually more of like a YA book on the younger side. It's called Catherine Called Birdie. It's about like this
Yeah,
girl. Have you read it?
I have it.
It has it's
I
coming
do
out.
know of it though, because I know that there was like a adaptation that just came out not too long
Yeah,
ago.
with Bella Ramsey in it.
Yeah, oh, so
Yeah,
talented.
it's so good. It's really fun. It has the guy who plays Moriarty from Sherlock too in it.
Yeah, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it's
I
really
saw
really
I think
good.
he plays her dad, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
It's such a
it's a really really fun book. It's about this girl who's she's very snarky. She has a very modern attitude almost, and she's going through this time period where young women get married off, and so she's dealing with all of this stuff, and she's like she doesn't want to get married, and she's like it's basically almost like a diary of sorts of her life in
Mhm.
that period, and it's so fun. She's so snarky in it. It's great. And like I haven't watched the entire, I think it's a TV show, right? I
Yeah, I
haven't
think
watched the entirety of it. I watched clips though, and it seems really
mhm.
really delightful, so that's what I'm watching next for sure.
Yeah, and like she's very, at least from what you described from the character, I think Bella Ramsey's very fitting for that because she
Yeah.
has played characters like that before. I
Mhm.
mean, The Last of Us kind of comes to mind with that like quirky and like sassy type of character. So
Yeah, and Liana Mormont too. So she's
Mhm.
like definitely got that down. And
Sure.
it's just, I guess, like I read the book for social studies, which is like our version of history class. And this
Mhm.
would have been like in grade 9, but considering the fact that oftentimes I'll read books for school and then just forget them right after, and I still remember that book pretty vividly, it's a really
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Um, in terms of medieval, I think our April book kind of comes to mind for me too.
For sure.
So no spoilers for the April book,
Hmm.
but it's very much medieval vibes. I think April boxes actually started shipping, so whoever has gotten their boxes, they'll know what I'm talking about for sure. But
Exactly.
yeah, once you see the book and you kind of understand what the book is about, it's very also kind of related to like medieval historical fiction as well. So yeah.
And from somebody who almost became a medievalist, I give April's book like 2 thumbs up. It's like fully approved. I loved it. So
Mhm.
keep an eye out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, One question is a more specific question of could you recommend books like And I Darken? Historical fiction is so rare. So I agree, historical fiction is very rare. I actually had to look up the blurb for this one because I haven't heard it before. But reading the blurb, it kind of reminded me of this other book coming out called Of Light and Shadow. It's a historical fiction that's set in like 17th century India, and it's a standalone, but they're both historical fiction fantasies, and like politics play a part, and it's like a test of like the characters' loyalty and their relationship with each other. And I saw like a lot of similarities between those two from what I know about those books. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend that. It's a standalone and it looks really good. It comes out like in a month.
I think I read And I Darken. This would have been very, very early on, like when it came out when I was in high school. I really loved it.
Mhm.
Romanov is also, in terms of not necessarily in plot, but like in the type of like intrigue that comes through, Romanov is a very good book, like historical fiction book, because
Mhm.
it also has like the same kind of courtly intrigue plot, and it also has really strong character dynamics. And yeah, so that's my rec if you liked And I Darken.
Mhm. Romanov reminds me a lot of just like in general content that's related to that family, especially like the last members of the family before the revolution, because there's so much content around them, and in terms of like the conspiracy theories about like Anastasia and stuff like that. Like I remember as a kid, I watched the animated movie for Anastasia, was obsessed. Like I know deep in my heart, like it's not historically accurate at all, but like just the nostalgia and like the just the vibes and the romance in that movie was just like it remains in me. Like I loved that movie so much.
Dimitri is still like literally one of my favorite
Oh
animated
my
characters.
gosh, one of my first like
Yeah,
crushes for real. I'm not even kidding. Like so good.
yeah.
It's like
And
he was like the that like kind of like he had that bad boy
the
vibe because like
soft.
he was like someone who like is rogue and stuff like that in society. But like yeah, he got soft for Anastasia, and I was like,
Mhm.
so cute.
And the music for the film, like, oh my gosh, the
Yes.
soundtrack is iconic. Have you seen the Broadway show?
I haven't. I regret it so
Me
much
too.
because it came out. The Broadway show was like around the time where I was in high school or like beginning of college when it was like showing, like when they had the showing for on Broadway. And like I live in New York, so I could have gone, but I was a broke college student. I didn't have that kind of money to go watch a Broadway show. And then by the time I did get enough where I could like, maybe splurge on a Broadway show, it got canceled. I was like, this did not have a long enough runtime. I wanted to watch it so bad.
They were supposed to do like not a tour necessarily, but like they were in Vancouver recently, and unfortunately we had
Mhm.
tickets for it, but like they got the tickets were from like pre-pandemic times, and they moved
Mhm.
it to now, and unfortunately we did not find the time to go see it, me and my little sister, so didn't miss that chance, I guess. But I've watched it through other means, and the musical is fantastic. They've added a lot of different details in. They've changed the plot up a little bit, but I think they're good changes. Also, the costuming in the musical is so, so nice. Like,
Mhm.
all of the costumes are so gorgeous. So, yeah, if anybody is watching and they have the chance to go see the Anastasia musical, I highly, highly recommend it. It
Mhm.
is such a good time.
It's always interesting to see content like historical fiction content, but it's technically based off of real characters. Like
Mhm.
with the Romanov family, it's like really interesting how people kind of make content about them in like so many different ways over people who like actually existed, really.
Yeah.
And
I
like I
think
know
it's
in the Broadway musical, they did take a more historical base, including like the revolution and stuff like that compared to like the movie. Because like the songs and all that kind of stuff, that kind of content was from the movie,
mhm.
for sure. It was definitely inspired by the movie, but they did like add their own things for sure.
I think it's also because it like at the heart of the story, the conspiracy theory is still very real. Like
Hmm.
it's been something that's been like argued to and fro by like historians. And while there's like no concrete evidence, and most historians say like that like she didn't survive, there's still always that like that little tiny bit chance, and like weirder things have happened, right? So I
Yeah,
guess it's like people are intrigued by that, which is also like I think it's fun. It's also kind of sad if you think about it that way.
yeah.
Yeah. But there's also like a
Victoria.
lot of like adult fiction books, like adult historical fiction books that are around the Romanov family. None of them are coming to my head like title wise. But if you do like a good research, there's like a
There's
Romanov.
a good number of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Victoria says Dimitri with the heart, and I wholeheartedly agree. Just
Yeah,
like
for sure.
completely.
Love Four Horses one says, I just read the Winter Night trilogy and I love getting a glimpse of historical Russia. Yeah, I love the Winter Night trilogy so much. I think the one thing about the Winter Night trilogy that really, really struck me as like being very unique is it depicts the struggle between this old sort of like paganism in Russian tradition and the new, well, not new necessarily, but like the church. And I think that kind of that struggle plays like a very subtle plot line within like the three books in the trilogy. And I haven't found anything similar in any other book. And as somebody who loves like Russian history and like specifically medieval Russian history, it's very unique. And Catherine Arden did like a really, really good job with that.
I think that's something that's also like kind of like a gold mine to find when you find unique tropes in historical fiction, because it is there are a lot of historical fiction books that kind of take the same route, albeit like different fonts, I guess. But when you add that little bit of spice that like really changes up the story and idea and the concept of whatever time you're talking about or telling a story about, it's like really fun to like find like unique gems like that.
For sure. I think it's also for an author to be able to kind of forcefully transfer like the reader into a time period where we're so unfamiliar with things and be able to like immerse ourselves in that world. It's a struggle for them to write, but I also think it's very admirable that they're doing something like that, because writing historical fiction takes a very different skill set than writing any other, I think, type of fiction. Yeah, and making it entertaining too, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The next question we have is other World War I books. I already read Lovely War. Unfortunately, everything I've read for World War I that I can recall is very, again, kind of classic, which is a little bit pretentious, but English major. Hemingway's Farewell to Arms came to mind. I actually, confession, I don't like Hemingway. I think his writing is sparse, and I'm the type of person who enjoys purple prose. Like, as long as it's fancy sounding and, kind of like that, I love that. Ernest Hemingway, because he was a journalist, it really comes through in his writing. You can tell he writes in this very like bare way, and I know people love him, and I've read like so many of his works, but I just can't get into it. I respect that people love him though. Farewell to Arms is arguably one of his better novels. It's set during World War I, if I remember correctly. All Quiet on the Western Front, also another classic. Kind of hard to get through. I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people who didn't, but it's one of the classics. And also, I read a book that came out, I think, in 2012 or 2013. It's called The Winter Ghost by Kate Moss, who has done a lot of historical fiction. It's set in 1928. The backdrop is like World War One. It has a little bit of a romance to it, and it is written really atmospherically, and that book struck me because the romance in there was very, very different than what I was expecting it to be. And so yeah, those are my 3 recommendations. Again, if you are looking specifically for World War I Rex for historical fiction, depending on like which crossover genre you're looking for, like romance or like the classics or just anything, there are a bunch of lists up online that you can search up by people who know what they're talking about in terms of World War I. But I have like no actual like historical background with World War I, so I can't tell you how accurate the 3 that I said are. Yeah.
It's interesting when it comes to classics, like reading classics or recommending classics, because it's like sometimes it can really just be a hit or miss in terms of their writing and stuff like that. But also because they're named classics, it's like, they're always going to be kind of around because of it. Like they've kind of made their mark, which is really interesting. Like it's a really interesting dichotomy of like, if you don't like a classics author, like, oh, I don't like their writing or something like that. But then it's also a thing of like acknowledging like, but they're gonna be around for like probably forever because they are known as classics, regardless of what I think. Which is different than like having opinions of authors that are a little bit more new. If anything, I feel like there's like an interesting difference there.
I think like for a book to become a classic, it takes like a certain combination of things, luck being definitely one of them. But people also tend to forget that if you're reading from a certain time period, so like things specifically written in a time period, you have the classics, but you also have a lot of other books that were written in that period that are still available, but people overlook them because they aren't classics. So if you are really interested in like a certain thing, it's always a good idea to like go into like a deep dive and find less popular authors that are related to like popular authors from that time period, and that's how you find like a lot of hidden gems. So yeah, I mean, classics people tend to be overrated. I'll be really honest. I've read enough classics to say that everybody's opinion of them is really different because reading styles have also changed going by like time periods, and a lot of them like the plot is good but the writing can get tedious just because we're not used to it. So
I think it's also because of the fact that like I think something that does contribute to a book becoming like that became classics over the past like however many years, if a book becomes a classic, a big part of it has to do with the fact that it's a lot of men that are like in the classics genre, and a lot less it's like very men dominated in the classics from what I've seen at the very least. Whereas stories now, it's not just men, it's dominated by so many other diverse voices now, whereas like with classics it's kind of harder to find that because those voices just weren't uplifted back then.
For sure. Yeah. It also comes down to like a lot of the history of print itself is because when authors used to publish their books up to like a certain time period anyways, they'd have to like obviously like send their manuscripts out, and then the printing press and the publishers would basically set the amount of books that were sent out. So a lot of the classics that we see that have endured to this day are books that the publisher deemed worthy to send out, and so they printed more copies, and then those copies were more widely distributed so more people could hear about them. But there's also a lot of works that were produced locally that only got like a limited run and therefore really never got out, and some of those are really good. It just takes like a bit of looking for, and all of this kind of stuff is like really fascinating, but it's also kind of sad to think about because missed opportunities and, like you said, diverse voices. There is like a history of like women writing too, especially during like the Victorian period and onward, and a lot of those were published in a different way than obviously the books by men were. So again, those definitely exist. It just takes a little bit more digging because they're not widely available.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to see that change now, though.
For sure.
Which historical fiction books do you recommend? There's so many of them, but when I saw this question, the ones that came to mind for me were All the Light We Cannot See, which is a book set during World War II. It's like a dual POV book. It's really, really like I was like sad reading it, but it's a really strong book. It's by Anthony Doerr, I think. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, also a World War II book. So for the person who said that they love anything World War II, if you haven't read these, I mean, these are pretty popular stories. And Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society has an adaptation too, which I personally liked. I thought it was really cute. And also like in a more fantasy light, I also really liked These Violent Delights. I really liked Chloe Gong's depiction of that setting and time period. I thought it was really well done.
My recommendations are Outlander for the romance, if you like romance. These Violent Delights too, just because the setting for Shanghai is so well done, and I'm from Shanghai, so it was really nice reading something from my hometown. And I also recently reread Beloved, which is a historical fiction book set. It's also like a little bit of a horror story, but it is set in the period right after the American Civil War, which is not a period that I'm particularly familiar with. But Beloved deals with like intergenerational trauma, especially amongst like Black folks, and it's a very very deep story. It's written really well because Toni Morrison is a fantastic writer and she's iconic, but it's a very dark story. If you're in the mood for that kind of stuff, it's a good read. I also really enjoyed Dorothy L. Sayers' books. Dorothy L. Sayers wrote a lot of detective fiction set between World War One and World War Two. It's mostly like considered detective fiction, but there's a lot of historical elements to it. Dorothy L. Sayers' writing is also really fun to read, and her detective plots are so great. Like she's arguably, I would say, comparable to Agatha Christie, who's another one of my favorites. So if you're into detective fiction, I also highly recommend you check her out because she's not as popular as Agatha is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any specific historical fiction? We've talked about books. Any type of media that you like, that like, you know, movies, shows, and like any other adaptations that like have come out that stick to your mind?
I'm not much of a TV watcher, so right now what's in my head is like Game of Thrones, which is like medievally esque, and like I guess Martin based it on the War of the Roses, so I could count it as medieval fiction. But yeah, I don't tend to watch too much TV.
Mm-hmm. I really like all the Pride and Prejudice adaptations.
Yeah.
I'm a very big Pride and Prejudice fan. It is a classic, but I kind of put it in that realm as well because it is kind of a historical fiction for us. It was written so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I've watched like a good number of them. I think I watched because like there are a good number of Pride and Prejudice adaptations that have been made over the last however many years. So like the most well known ones are like the 1995 BBC and then the 2005 Keira Knightley one. I think I also watched one. I think it was made in the 1940s or 50. I don't know. It was like it was black and white time period. So I watched that one too. That was an interesting watch. But I'm very much 2005 at heart because that was just
Mm-hmm.
like my favorite. Like the vibes of that one was just too immaculate for me to just not, you know, love that one.
The hand flex moment.
The hand
Yeah.
flex. Oh my gosh. And then like it's so funny because like even with all of the adaptations or whatever, it's like every time um Lizzie goes to the Pemberley house, she has this look of like, this is what I gave up. It's just like her kind of turning the wheels in her heads of like, so this is where he lives. Okay, this may have been mine. Interesting. Yeah.
In that vein, I actually really enjoyed North and South too, which is that like not I wouldn't say like in a similar period, but it has like the same kind of like historical vibe as Pride and Prejudice. It's like again, people jokingly call it Pride and Prejudice for socialists because it has a little bit more of a plot and it talks
Um,
about like workers' rights and stuff like that. But the romance is also really cute. There's so much tension, and there's also a lot of hand flexes in that one too.
mm,
Yeah,
it's the hand flex makes it.
for sure.
Yeah. One that I also watched pretty recently because I hadn't watched it before, but I was like, yeah, well, let me just give it a shot. Was Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and it was probably like the weirdest adaptation. Like I, I loved the fun that they had with like changing up the story, but it was definitely a weird one.
Oh, another one came to mind. I recently watched a little bit more of like the series Vikings. Like there's like a whole bunch of seasons. I haven't like I tend to skip watch for that one because certain parts of that plot don't interest me as much. Also, it's not very historically accurate, but the cinematography for that and the music is great. So like if you're into Scandinavian history and like just Vikings in general, it's a fun watch. And everybody's really hot, so like, you know, which is a plus.
That makes it
Yeah.
better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, I guess, like one of the really popular ones that have been out? The really popular, like a show that's been out is Bridgerton, which is like
Oh.
massive right now. But it's really interesting because like it is historical fiction, but I would also say it's probably not the most accurate. But it's still kind of enjoyable to watch because like it's juicy drama. You know what I mean?
It's like it's history light, I would say, because it has all of the drama and the oomph of like the Regency period, which is always really fun. And like, who doesn't like, you know, reading or watching, but like debutantes and like, you know, those fancy balls and you know, just rich people like lying around eating fancy little foods and like talking smack about other rich people and like, you know, affairs, torrid affairs where they're hooking up with people they shouldn't. That's like the fun part. Like Regency era.
The juiciness of the time.
Yeah, but like they don't stick to the other parts of the Regency era that might not be as fun. Like, I don't know, collecting taxes and like the mundanity of daily life and doctors, female history, all of those like things that don't need to be romanticized. They get like pushed off to the side. I think that's like a fun way to kind of like experience the Regency era without getting into the dark stuff, which is great. I just didn't like Bridgerton because of the costumes. I've like ranted
That
about
makes sense. I've heard the costumes are not the most accurate, but I think like people have been having fun with those costumes, especially because I think since the show came out, I think especially since the second season came out, there have been like those Bridgerton balls that they've been hosting all over the place. One just opened in New York, which I'm really excited about. So, but I think people have kind of just been having fun, you know, dressing up in like similar to like that kind of style, or just like in general, like in a style that's just not of our time, I guess you would say. Just like really, it's really fun to see. It's also really interesting because I think there's this thing about like it's always really fun for people to go out of like explore fashion wise and like other time periods and like step into the world through fashion. I think that's like really cool to see sometimes in like these kind of balls, not even just the Bridgerton ball, because like I've seen people host balls in general and like, you know, like wearing like ball gowns that would have been like worn years and years ago and stuff, and just like like kind of immersing yourself in that kind of time period the best that you can.
During the pandemic, when Bridgerton was at its like peak popularity, I was actually walking out in one of the nicer parks in my area, and there were 3 girls dressed up as like Regency era characters, and they were having themselves a little picnic off at the side of the park.
So cute.
It was really cute, and I was like, you know what? I love that. I think people should wear more historical fiction, like fiction clothing. Just not even historical fiction clothing, just like historical clothing in general, like outside. Go for it. Life is short. If you love
why not?
Right? Go for it.
I've seen a good number of like TikTok accounts too, where their content is specifically wearing like historical related like fashion or talking about historical fashion, and it's really cool to see because it's so different from now, and it's interesting to kind of learn about that stuff too.
What strikes me is like the amount of effort like people put in nowadays to creating these because like some of these costumes are so elaborate. If you look at like the Victorian costumes, you have so many layers to the skirts, the corset, and then you have like the bustle, which is like the thing that goes at the back to make the skirts poof. All of that stuff is so heavy, and it must be a pain in the butt to like wear, but people go through that nowadays, and they make it accurate too, and they put all that effort in, and like I also find that so admirable, like sticking to that. I also follow a lot of those accounts on Instagram. They're so cool to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Victoria says anything Sherlock too. I very much agree with that. It's interesting because Sherlock is definitely in the historical fiction vibe, but I think a lot of people know Sherlock also from the BBC show, which is definitely not historical fiction. It's very much more of a modern take. but I still loved it. I loved it even if it was a modern take, because that's like one of my favorite shows, and I loved the portrayal of Sherlock. But I have this like gigantic volume of just like Sherlock stories from Arthur Conan Doyle. I think I said his name right. Um, that I like really want to get to, because there's like so many cool stories, and like I kind of want to immerse myself in like the historical fiction setting of the stories rather than the modern take that like everyone kind of knows now.
I think like BBC Sherlock and Elementary, like those two Sherlocks are the most well-known like modern Sherlocks. They tend to be like as somebody who like read the original books back in high school and like loved them, I'd say that like the modern adaptations take Sherlock and put him in a modern setting and then change his character to something that's very different. Like there's a thread of like the original Sherlock, but he's a very different character because of that modernism type of thing almost. And it's fun. It's just I have two different versions of Sherlock in my head. There's the old one and the new one. In terms of like old historical Sherlock portrayals, there's like a bunch. Oh gosh, I'm blanking out on the date. There's a very, very well done historical like Sherlock that's I think it's a TV show. But if you search it up, it's like one of the black and white ones.
I feel like I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
because I have very distinct like childhood memories of watching like a black and white show of like Sherlock that was like more accurate to the time. It wasn't modern. So I think I'm thinking what you're thinking. But I don't remember the name either because it was so long ago.
You might have like definitely seen like clips of it floating around too, because it still is like pretty popular. And like if you were on Tumblr during that period of time where like Sherlock was like a big deal, you definitely would have seen like that show. It's really well done though. I will say that as like a black and white film like geek, that one really, really was like done in a way that is enjoyable in this like modern age. And it's oh gosh, I'm blanking out. The actors for that were phenomenal. So. Yeah.
And I think like the most recent adaptation for Sherlock, although it doesn't have his name, is Enola Holmes. It's also on. I personally, it was like a really fun watch for me. Both of the movies, even though like obviously it's a very different take on Sherlock. But I mean, if you're watching like Henry Cavill as Sherlock, it's bound to be like a good time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it, but I've seen clips of Henry Cavill as like a Sherlock, and his sulkiness is like it's so funny because like you don't expect that from him, but you expect it from Sherlock, so it gives you a little bit of whiplash.
Yeah, I liked his portrayal because like I'm more used to the Benedict Cumberbatch portrayal, so it was really refreshing to see like this new portrayal of Sherlock, and I mean like having Enola Holmes added to it. And I've watched both of them. I watched the second, like I went to the premiere of the second one, which was like a really kind of weird and crazy experience because like that was so random for me, but it was super fun to watch. I definitely really loved the second one, especially because it was leaning a lot more into a lot of the other characters that show up in the Sherlock stories that didn't show up in the first movie. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we're getting more Sherlock content. But like in general, like it was really cool to see like the story being incorporated more so with like Enola Holmes as like the focal point.
I'm going to add that to my list because I'm kind of really historical.
And like I think that was like the basis of like the actual story of like the conflict and stuff like that. Like it was based on like his historical event of like workers striking. And I think that was like a really powerful like thing to add to the movie too, that I think really worked well. Yeah. I also haven't watched RDJ's version because I know that exists. I just haven't watched it because
I haven't either.
That one is a very like random one for me, but I'm like just remembering. I was like, RDJ played Sherlock too.
I think it was like that. Those films, like the RDJ version, came out in a period like when we were young enough to not watch it, but old enough not to care about it.
Yeah.
Sense. In that in between time.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 movies or maybe 3. So like it wasn't doing too bad, but also like I think the BBC show was more on my radar than the movie. Definitely.
Have you watched Peaky Blinders? That one just came to mind.
I haven't. I really want to watch it though, because I just keep hearing so many good things. I hear a lot of comparisons between the two also.
Yeah. Peaky Blinders is definitely more like, obviously it's less detective fiction and it's more like intrigue, not even political necessarily. It's like it's about like gang intrigue, which is pretty
Yeah.
fun. But like the costuming, the setting, and the cinematography for that TV series is great. We also have a book coming up that if you like if you watched Peaky Blinders and you liked it, we have a book that might excite you.
Mm-hmm.
Can't say anything else than that. But it definitely gives off Peaky Blinder vibes, and I love Peaky Blinders because like there's so much angst in that TV series. It's very dark, but the angst hits you so good.
Oh, angst is like
Yeah.
perfect. You said angst, I'm like,
So
gotta get to that soon. Angst is like so good, bro. Like in any kind of way that it's portrayed, like angst just adds the little bit of spice that you need.
for sure. Angst is like, you know that term like hurt so good? That's me with angst. Like sometimes you just need a little bit of angst to feel better about your own life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, too good. Yeah, I think we are good to kind of continue on to some of our other questions because we did get a bunch of questions in like general about OwlCrate news and such. I do
Mm-hmm.
want to get to those. So,
Let's see. First question on my list is ETA on the price of the Shadow and Bone exclusive edition. So not yet. We'll keep you updated for sure, but things are moving along for this box very rapidly, I'll say.
mhm.
And we're so excited for you guys to see what we have planned for the box. I will also say that we're definitely going to try and keep the price, as reasonable as possible. Obviously, we also need to take into account the fact that it's 3 books plus a whole treasure box full of like items basically, so we're still getting person stuff done, but all in all it's going to be such a good experience with this box.
And this is like the first, like not the first, but the biggest kind of box, special edition box that we've done. If any of you remember with the Raven Boys, it was the first book and a whole bunch of items in that world as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shadow and Bone is probably that exponentially.
Yeah.
So you are getting all 3 books for this one. And it's like a bunch of really cool items in that world that like I think people will really love. Like they're really substantial items, and the design work that's going into all of these, including the books, especially the books. Oh my gosh, like so stunning. The artists are so talented and they're like so lovely to work with. And I'm like really excited to start showing, like when we can, like sneak peeks of like little parts of the art that is going to be featured on like the books, especially.
For sure. And
Yeah,
like the
every
items in
time.
this box too, we put so much thought into
Mhm.
every piece. Like we literally have spent hours upon hours brainstorming on how to make this box feel authentic as possible in terms of like the vibe with the items too, because we're working very closely with Lee. We're getting feedback on them, and they're very, very substantial items that will like literally immerse you in the universe. Like if you like the Raven Boys box and you like the general vibe of that box, this box is going to kick that boxes but like it's so immersive. And we've
Mhm.
again, like I think the brainstorming that we've done, like we went full edge on that.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot of brainstorming. It's a lot of work going into making sure that it is book accurate. It's a lot of work to make sure that this is like visually not just something that we like, but also something that Lee likes and something that you guys would also like. It's really fun to show updates on the art that we've been getting on these projects. Every time we
Mhm.
see like new updates, we just keep getting more and more excited about it. And like to kind of give a little bit of context about how insane this brainstorming process has been. This process has been going on since before I even joined.
Yeah,
So it's been a long time coming, and like I'm really excited that I get to be a part of this process. But it's definitely like we're just so excited to get it out to you guys finally.
it's been I think almost exactly a year since we started like
Mm-hmm.
working on the box, like brainstorming for it. And yeah, I mean we're also doing a bunch of items that we've never done before, so those items are going to be so unique, and they're things that we might necessarily not be able to do in a regular box. We put them into this box. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. When will the first theme for the adult fantasy subscription box be announced? So this process is going to be kind of similar to how we release themes for our current YA box. Is we usually reveal the theme around a month-ish before the box would be shipped. Unless it's an early release, then we'll probably release the theme a little bit earlier, kind of like what we did with May. But because we're hoping to launch the adult box in the summer, it'll probably be like around in the summers. I would look for an update around then. Yeah,
we
so
have
that's
a
coming
lot
up
of good. We have like a lot of good picks for this, for like the first couple of adult boxes. A lot of fun books. We're currently looking at one right now that I'm super excited about too. So, yeah, I think people are gonna love it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the next big trend in book boxes? So I think we're both in agreement when we say page overlays has been really big recently. I think we've seen some other book boxes also start to get into page overlays as well, and it's also something that we've been considering too, because there's such a really cool addition to like special art that you can put in your books.
It's something that we're considering doing. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Little bit of a spoiler for you guys. I also think page overlays are just they're such handy little items because they don't take up that much space, and you can just flip them in the page, like in the book, and then put them on top of like your favorite page and just leave it there. But they add so much like oomph to the book, and also they're so lovely to look at. I love like the translucent effect.
So cool. One of the live questions from Casey Carnage asks, will you guys later on be doing the rest of the Raven Boys in their own separate box?
I think that's currently still something that we're looking into. Can't give a definitive answer, but I know that we definitely want to if we have the opportunity to do so.
We will keep you updated on that, but that is something that we definitely want to try and do, especially because people really loved our initial Raven Boys box, and we would love to have the set completely match as well to our first cover.
I just think of like a matching set of the Raven Boys in general. It'll look so nice too, with like variations on like the theme of the first cover.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. Next question: can you give us any hints for summer boxes? So we have some new things that we've never done before, and I think they're going to be things that people are really gonna love. Our summer boxes, I would say like the books are thematically very different, but they all have a very it's not like a similar vibe, but it all has that like a similar sense of like drama, if that makes sense. And they're very different in terms of the plot. It's just, I think if you enjoyed one of those books, you'll definitely enjoy the rest of them for sure. And I can't really say much about what's coming up, but I hope you all enjoy our picks because we had so much fun reading like these set of books specifically. I think that's when you joined on to Yeatasmin, right? When we were starting like the process for like the summer books.
Yeah, I joined on when we started we were kind of towards the end of working on May and like April. And so kind of getting into like, June, July, August. Yeah, like starting those boxes for sure. And I think like it's like to kind of give you guys an idea, like I would say like May onwards has been us like trying a lot of new things that we haven't done before, which is like really fun to see and like really exciting because it's like giving you guys some new things that we haven't given you before, and I think like you guys would really enjoy them.
We've really been pushing our limits and like trying to expand, which is really, really fun.
Yes.
So stay tuned.
Any hints on the first adult book? So again, our first adult book will be in the summer, ideally. And the only thing I can say is something that we've said before, which is that it's a retelling by an author that's known for retellings. So I'm not going to say anything else beyond that, but I think that's a good enough hint to give you an idea of who it might be.
I'm also
And
going to
what-
say very action-packed. There's so much going on in that book, which is really fun.
Definitely.
Next question. What's the best way to make suggestions for possible box items? Instagram or the Nest app? Like the Nest app, which y'all are watching from, it's great. Jordan like literally sends everything. So if you bring something up in the Nest, Jordan will make sure that we get it. So shout out to Jordan for doing that. And also Instagram. Like our social media team is so lovely, and they update us on everything. So regardless of where you're reaching out, it'll get to us.
Yeah, I would stick to those apps. And yeah, we try to keep all the feedback and all the suggestions that you guys give in mind and try to make them work as much as we can as well. What would be your dream author to work with on a boxed or officially licensed item? So I think we're already kind of both working with our dream author, being Leigh Bardugo. Like I've been a fan of her. Like she's been one of my favorite authors. Like she's still one of my favorite authors. So I think like this is kind of like our dream project right now. With Leigh. It's really nice working with her because her feedback is really great, and I think it's just been a really, really cool process to work with her. It's been really smooth, really overall just a really, really enjoyable process to work with Leigh.
Yeah. Shadow and Bone was what got me into YA, so it's also very nostalgic in a sense for me, because like I've been almost immersed in like the Greaseverse for well over a decade. Well, not well over a decade, exactly a decade now. So it's been like, it feels surreal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Another
Another one for me, this is a very, very, very big stretch, but Suzanne Collins would be another one, because as some people might know, because I bring it up in like every other live, I'm like very Hunger Games obsessed. So like, and like I'm really excited for like the new movie coming out too, because like I live for any Hunger Games content. I'm like, I love Hunger Games. But yeah, that would be like one of those dream authors to work with that is just like, just I mean, probably not gonna happen, but it's nice to dream, you know what I mean? You never know.
I mean, like I would say like, working with Leigh Bardugo is also a dream. Don't give up on your dreams, right?
Yeah, definitely. That would be a really cool author to work with, especially because like, when it comes to like the books for the Hunger Games, there's not a lot of like special content for them that exists right now. So that would be really cool to go into.
In the same vein, I would also like love to work with Rick Riordan for anything Percy Jackson related. Like that's also like one of my dreams. I think because like Percy Jackson was like one of those series that really like it was a big part of my childhood. It was like a big part of my little sister's childhood too, and we loved the book so much. So I really, really would love to do something. But again, this is also like just a dream. But we're dreaming big right now. So
yeah, I mean, if you're gonna dream, why limit yourself? You know what I mean? Yeah, definitely. So that is all the questions that we have for today. This was a really fun live. I liked trying out something a little bit new for our Coffee with Curators. Folks can sign up to the newsletter, and you can rewatch our lives on the live stream tab on the Nest. You should sign up to subscribe and purchase, especially because our subscription spots are becoming really low lately. I would definitely sign up to subscribe. And yeah, keep up with our social media, our TikTok and Instagram for more OwlCrate news.
We have a lot of exciting things coming up. So for sure, keep an eye out for things. The giveaway winners will be contacted by our awesome social media team not right after, but like sometime after this. So watch the Insta stories for announcements. And thank you for joining us, everyone. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. Can't wait to see y'all in our next live where we actually talk about March's box.